Arabian Nights, translated by Sir Richard F. Burton. Chapter 1. The Tale of Scheherazade. In tide of yore, and in time long gone before, there was a king of kings of the Banu Sasan in the islands of India and China. There was a lord of armies and guards and servants and dependents. He left only 2 sons, one in the prime of manhood and the other yet a youth. While both were knights and braves, albeit the elder was a doughtier horseman than the younger. So he succeeded to the empire, when he ruled the land and forded it over his lieges, with justice so exemplary that he was beloved by all the peoples of his capital and of his kingdom. His name was King Shahryar, and he made his younger brother Shah Zaman Hight, king of Samarkand in barbarian land. These 2 ceased not to abide in their several realms, and the law was ever carried out in their dominions, and each ruled in his own kingdom, with equity and fair dealings to his subjects, in extreme solace and enjoyment, and this condition continually endured for a score of years. But at the end of the 20th 12-month, the elder king yearned for a sight of his younger brother, and felt that he must look upon him once more. So he took counsel with his wazir about visiting him, but the minister, finding the project unadvisable, recommended that a letter be written and a present be sent under his charge to the younger brother with an invitation to visit the elder. Having accepted this advice, the king forthwith bade prepare handsome gifts, such as horses with saddles of gem-encrusted gold, mamelukes or white slaves, beautiful handmaids, high-breasted virgins, and splendid stuffs and costly. He then wrote a letter to Shah Zaman, expressing his warm love and great wish to see him, ending with these words: "We therefore hope of the favor and affection of the beloved brother, that he will condescend to bestir himself and turn his face us wards. Furthermore, we have sent our wazir to make all ordinance for the march, and our one and only desire is to see thee ere we die. But if thou delay or disappoint us, we shall not survive the blow. Wherewith peace be upon thee." Then King Shahryar, having sealed the missive and given it to the wazir with the offerings aforementioned, commanded him to shorten his skirts and strain his strength, and make all expedition in going and returning. "Hearkening in obedience," quoth the minister, who fell to making ready without stay, and packed up his loads and prepared all his requisites without delay. This occupied him 3 days, and on the dawn of the 4th he took leave of his king, and marched right away, over desert and hillway, stony waste, and pleasant lay, without halting by night or by day. But whenever he entered a realm whose ruler was subject to his suzerain, where he was greeted with magnificent gifts of gold and silver, and all manner of presents fair and rare, he would tarry there 3 days, the term of the guest right, and, when he left on the 4th, he would be honorably escorted for a whole day's march. As soon as the wazir drew near Shah Zaman's court in Samarkand, he dispatched to report his arrival one of his high officials, who presented himself before the king, and, kissing the ground between his hands, delivered his message. Hereupon the king commanded sundry of his grandees and lords of his realm to fare forth and meet his brother's wazir at the distance of a full day's journey, which they did, greeting him respectfully and wishing him all prosperity, and forming an escort and a procession. When he entered the city, he proceeded straightway to the palace, where he presented himself in the royal presence, and, after kissing ground and praying for the king's health and happiness, and for victory over all his enemies, he informed him that his brother was yearning to see him, and prayed for the pleasure of a visit. He then delivered the letter which Shah Zaman took from his hand and read. It contained sundry hints and allusions which required thought, but, when the king had fully comprehended its import, he said, "I hear and I obey the commands of my beloved brother," adding to the wazir, "but we will not march till after the 3rd day's hospitality." He appointed for the minister fitting quarters of the palace, and, pitching tents for the troops, rationed them with whatever they might require of meat and drink and other necessaries. On the 4th day he made ready for wayfare, and got together sumptuous presents befitting his elder brother's majesty, and established his chief wazir viceroy of the land during his absence. Then he caused his tents and camels and mules to be brought forth and encamped, with their bales and loads, attended ants and guards within sight of the city, in readiness to set out next morning for his brother's capital. But when the night was half spent, he bethought him that he had forgotten in his palace somewhat which he should have brought with him. So he turned privily and entered his apartments, where he found the queen, his wife, asleep on his own carpet bed, embracing with both arms a black cook of loathsome aspect and foul with kitchen grease and grime. When he saw this, the world waxed black before his sight, and he said, "If such case happen while I am yet within sight of the city, what will be the doings of this damned whore during my long absence at my brother's court?" So he drew his scimitar, and, cutting the two in 4 pieces with a single blow, left them on the carpet and returned presently to his camp, without letting anyone know of what had happened. Then he gave orders for immediate departure, and set out at once and began his travel. But he could not help thinking over his wife's treason, and he kept saying to himself, "How could she do this deed by me? How could she work her own death?" Till excessive grief seized him, his color changed to yellow, his body waxed weak, and he was threatened with a dangerous malady, such an one as bringeth men to die. So the Wazir shortened his stages, and tarried long at the watering stations, and did his best to solace the king. Now when Shah Zaman drew near the capital of his brother, he dispatched vaunt couriers and messengers of glad tidings to announce his arrival. And Shahryar came forth to meet him with his wazirs and emirs, and lords and grandees of his realm, and saluted him, and joyed with exceeding joy, and caused the city to be decorated in his honor. When, however, the brothers met, the elder could not but see the change of complexion in the younger, and questioned him of his case, whereto he replied, "'Tis caused by the travails of wayfare, and my case needs care, for I have suffered from the change of water and air. But Allah be praised for reuniting me with a brother so dear and so rare." On this wise he dissembled, and kept his secret, adding, "O king of the time, and caliph of the tide, only toil and moil have tinged my face yellow with bile, and hath made my eyes sink deep in my head." Then the two entered the capital in all honor, and the elder brother lodged the younger in a palace overhanging the pleasure garden, and, after a time, seeing his condition still unchanged, he attributed it to his separation from his country and his kingdom. So he let him wend his own ways, and asked no questions of him, until one day when he again said, "O my brother, I see thou art grown weaker of body, and yellower of color." "O my brother," replied Shah Zaman, "I have an internal wound." Still he would not tell him what he had witnessed in his wife. Thereupon Shahryar summoned doctors and surgeons, and bade them treat his brother according to the rules of art, which they did for a whole month. But their sherbets and potions naught availed, for he would dwell upon the deed of his wife, and despondency, instead of diminishing, prevailed, and leechcraft treatment utterly failed. One day his brother said to him, "I am going forth to hunt and course, and to take my pleasure and pastime. Maybe this would lighten thy heart." Shah Zaman, however, refused, saying, "O my brother, my soul yearneth for naught of this sort, and I entreat thy favor to suffer me tarry quietly in this place, being wholly taken up with my malady." So King Shah Zaman passed his night in the palace, and next morning, when his brother had fared forth, he removed from his room and sat him down at one of the lattice windows overlooking the pleasure grounds. And there he abode, thinking with saddest thoughts over his wife's betrayal, and burning sighs issued from his tortured breast. As he continued in this case, lo, a pastern of the palace, which was carefully kept private, swung open, and out of it came 20 slave girls, surrounding his brother's wife, who was wondrous fair, a model of beauty and comeliness and symmetry and perfect loveliness, who paced with the grace of a gazelle, which panteth for the cooling stream. Thereupon Shah Zaman drew back from the window, but he kept the bevy in sight, espying them from a place where he could not be espied. They walked under the very lattice, and advanced a little way into the garden till they came to a jetting fountain, amiddlemost a great basin of water. Then they stripped off their clothes, and behold, 10 of them were women, concubines of the king, and the other 10 were white slaves. Then they all paired off, each with each, but the queen, who was left alone, presently cried out in a loud voice, "Hear to me, O my lord Saeed," and then sprang with a drop leap from one of the trees a big slobbering blackamoor, with rolling eyes which showed the whites, a truly hideous sight. He walked boldly up to her, and threw his arms round her neck, while she embraced him as warmly. Then he bussed her, and winding his legs round hers, as a button loop clasps a button, he threw her and enjoyed her. On likewise did the other slaves with the girls, till all had satisfied their passions, and they ceased not from kissing and clipping, coupling and carousing, till day began to wane. When the Mamelukes rose from the damsels' bosoms, and the blackamoor slave dismounted from the queen's breast, the men resumed their disguises, and all, except the negro who had swarmed up the tree, entered the palace, and closed the postern door as before. Now when Schahzaman saw this conduct of his sister-in-law, he said in himself, "By Allah, my calamity is higher than this. My brother is a greater king among the kings than I am, yet this infamy goeth on in his very palace, and his wife is in love with that filthiest of filthy slaves. But this only showeth that they all do it, and there is no woman but who cuckoldeth her husband. Then the curse of Allah upon one and all, and upon the fools who lean against them for support, or who place the reins of conduct in their hands." So he put away his melancholy and despondency, regret and repine, and allayed his sorrow by constantly repeating those words, adding, "'Tis my conviction that no man in this world is safe from their malice." When supper time came, they brought him the trays, and he ate with voracious appetite, for he had long refrained from meat, feeling unable to touch any dish, however dainty. Then he returned grateful thanks to Almighty Allah, praising him and blessing him, and he spent a most restful night, it having been long since he had savored the sweet food of sleep. Next day he broke his fast heartily, and began to recover health and strength, and presently regained excellent condition. His brother came back from the chase 10 days after, when he rode out to meet him, and they saluted each other. And when King Shahryar looked at King Schahzaman, he saw how the hue of health had returned to him, how his face had waxed ruddy, and how he ate with an appetite after his late scanty diet. He wondered much, and said, "O my brother, I was so anxious that thou wouldst join me in hunting and chasing, and wouldst take thy pleasure and pastime in my dominion." He thanked him and excused himself. Then the two took horse and rode into the city, and, when they were seated at their ease in the palace, the food trays were set before them, and they ate their sufficiency. After the meats were removed and they had washed their hands, King Shahryar turned to his brother and said, "My mind is overcome with wonderment at thy condition. I was desirous to carry thee with me to the chase, but I saw thee changed in hue, pale, and wan to view, and in sore trouble of mind too. But now, Alhamdulillah, glory be to God, I see thy natural color hath returned to thy face, and that thou art in the best of case. It was my belief that thy sickness came of severance from thy family and friends, and absence from capital and country, so I refrained from troubling thee with further questions. But now I beseech thee to expound to me the cause of thy complaint, and thy change of color, and to explain the reason of thy recovery, and the return to the ruddy hue of health which I am wont to view. So speak out, and hide naught." When Schahzaman heard this, he bowed groundwards a while his head, then raised it and said, "I will tell thee what caused my complaint, and my loss of color, but excuse my acquainting thee with the cause of its return to me, and the reason of my complete recovery. Indeed, I pray thee not press me for a reply." Said Shahryar, who was much surprised by these words, "Let me hear first what produced thy pallor, and thy poor condition." "Know then, O my brother," rejoined Schahzaman, "that when thou sentest thy wazir with the invitation to place myself between thy hands, I made ready and marched out of my city, but presently I minded me having left behind me in the palace a string of jewels intended as a gift to thee. I returned for it alone, and found my wife on my carpet bed, and in the arms of a hideous black cook. So I slew the twain, and came to thee. Yet my thoughts brooded over this business, and I lost my bloom, and became weak. But excuse me if I still refuse to tell thee what was the reason of my complexion returning." Shahryar shook his head, marveling with extreme marvel, and with the fire of wrath flaming up in his heart, he cried, "Indeed, the malice of woman is mighty." Then he took refuge from them with Allah, and said, "In very sooth, O my brother, thou hast escaped many an evil by putting thy wife to death, and right excusable were thy wrath and grief for such mishap which never befell a crowned king like thee. By Allah, had the case been mine, I would not have been satisfied without slaying 1,000 women, and that why madness lies. But now praise be to Allah who hath tempered to thee thy tribulation, and needs must thou acquaint me with that which so suddenly restored to thee complexion and health, and explain to me what causeth this concealment. O King of the age, again I must pray thee excuse my doing so." "Nay, but thou must." "I fear, O my brother, lest the recital cause thee more anger and sorrow than afflicted me." "That were but a better reason," quoth Shahryar, "for telling me the whole history, and I conjure thee, by Allah, not to keep back aught from me." Thereupon Schahzaman told him all that he had seen, from commencement to conclusion, ending with these words, "When I beheld thy calamity and the treason of thy wife, O my brother, and I resected that thou art in years my senior, and in sovereignty my superior. Mine own sorrow was belittled by the comparison, and my mind recovered tone and temper, so throwing off melancholy and despondency, I was able to eat and drink and sleep, and thus I speedily regained health and strength. Such is the truth and the whole truth.